26th of July 2015 was supposed to be a typical evening for Paul Massey as he entered a bar and booze on the outskirts of Manchester, England. Having bought his drinks, he tipped the cashier and left the store. Only 17 seconds behind, a stranger followed. Massey was walking up to his house with the Bacardi and Cokes when suddenly shots rang out in his driveway. Although it seemed like any other summer's evening, the reality was very different. Unknown to Massey, it would be his last. But how did he get to this point, dying on his driveway outside of his own home? On his way to the store that day, he drove a silver BMW 5 Series, a product of his work as one of Britain's most shrewd underworld operators. A criminal career to be envied, if that was your thing. The man who had spent half of his adult life behind bars, a price that he paid for a litany of crimes, eventually earning the infamous moniker Mr. Big, the man at the epicentre of Manchester's underworld. You are watching OCG TV. Chapter 1. The Foundations of an Icon. To understand Paul Massey, you need to understand the environment he was raised in. He was born in 1960 in the Ordsall area of Salford. It inspired the television series Coronation Street, with its rows of tightly packed terraces running down to the docks of the Manchester Ship Canal. It was a tough area, and Massey was a lawless child, committing his first burglary aged 8. His despairing father tried beatings to keep him in line, to no effect. An arrest for criminal damage when he was 12 became a formative experience. He was taken from his parents and sent to an approved school, which he later admitted to making him bitter against the system. The angry teenage Massey mixed with a large group of youths from neighbouring estates. Thieving and fighting were staple pastimes. His leap from street scally to serious player was the result of a vicious pub brawl with an older group of doormen that left one of the men brain damaged. Massey was jailed for 5 years for grievous bodily harm, his first serious jail time. Massey forged a reputation by refusing to obey prison rules. He was dragged to the block, the segregation unit, in Wakefield jail for organising a riot. At a disciplinary meeting, he hit the prison governor with a chair made of cardboard and was thrown into a strip cell where he refused food and water. Almost 2 years after being sentenced, he had his conviction quashed on appeal and he was freed. But male unemployment in inner-city Salford had peaked at more than 50% by the mid-1980s, and there was little legitimate future for a jailbird. Instead, he and his friends headed to Holland, running riot with counterfeit currency and dodgy credit cards supplied by an older criminal. The regional organised crime squad eventually caught them, and Massey was remanded in custody in Strangeways, then Britain's most overcrowded jail. He was ultimately convicted of heading what the judge called a very considerable crime enterprise, and lost another slice of his youth. But his criminal name had been made. Chapter 2. A Budding Enterprise. When Massey and his friends re-emerged, the Manchester music scene was in full swing and a new door opened. They entered with gusto, robbing the promoters of illegal raves, taking over events and selling ecstasy. Then they moved into the mainstream, rolling their protection racket across the city's booming clubland under the guise of legitimate security. Any venue that did not fall into line was wrecked. Any who resisted were beaten or shot. With a small army now behind him, Massey became almost untouchable. He was acquitted on charges of violent disorder at one club after terrified witnesses refused to testify, and by the mid-1990s, the doors of many of the city's nightclubs were secretly controlled by his proxies, including the most fashionable of them all, the Hacienda. Assaults were soon reported regularly at clubs across the city. Doorman was stabbed, one pub landlord lost an eye in a beating. A rival attempted to displace the management of the Hacienda and later found the decapitated head of his dog on the pool table at his home pub. In this moment, what the tabloids dubbed as Gangchester was born. Even when the infamous Mike Tyson came to the city for his fight with Julius Francis, the street violence was so appalling that Tyson was the one pleading for peace. Things got so bad that the leader of Manchester City Council wrote to the chief constable complaining that thugs and gangsters were seriously undermining business confidence so vital to the city's regeneration. Yet that was not enough. Massey's resentment of the establishment remained, and he became an alternative authority figure in Ordsall, mediating disputes, warning heroin dealers, whom he despised, to stay out of the area. Massey eventually legitimised his enterprise and set up PMS Security, assuring club bosses that there would be no more trouble as long as his crew manned the doors. He had shown the elites, and many Mancunians the city over, that he was here to change things for good. Having gained control over security, it was now time for Massey to command the ecstasy supply. The hold that the drug now had on Manchester was undeniable, and he knew that such a power could only lie with him. Massey and his associates would purchase the drug in bulk at its point of manufacturing in Amsterdam, as opposed to facing hiked prices on English soil. The real trick to this process was circumventing customs with an ingenious method. The men from Salford would put their carjacking skills to good use. They would find British travellers who had driven to the Netherlands, break into their vehicles and stash a couple of bags of ecstasy, typically under the spare tyre. Equally, the team made use of contacts to access a government database that matched licence plates with home addresses. The crux in the plan allowed them to break into the car again and retrieve the drugs back in England. With a purchase price of only a few pounds, each pill would sell in the UK for between £15 and £20. The plan was flawless in practice, and the gang was able to effectively monetize their troubled pasts. The Massey Collective would regularly bring in £10,000 a night from ecstasy sales alone. At one stage in the haymaking process, the Manchester Evening News reported that PMS Security had 120 men on its payroll with an annual revenue of a cool £1.7 million. The Hacienda Club was not the only business that had developed both competitors and imitators. Unfortunately for Massey, his enterprise was suffering the exact same problem. Gangsters claimed allegiance to outfits such as the Cheetham Hill Gang and the Pepper Hill Mob, and with competition came conflict. At the height of the madness that came with this period, Massey seemed to be getting arrested every other month, but he usually got off. He only galvanized himself further in 1994 when he helped broker a truce between two rival factions. His ability to negotiate peace between warring gangs would unfortunately contribute to his demise almost 15 years later. All good things come to an end, however. Massey had enjoyed a good 3-year run when things began to unravel. In June 1997, things had just gotten too far out of hand for the owners of Hacienda, leading to the club's closure. Ultimately, the venue was no longer able to guarantee people's safety, and more importantly, the club wasn't making any money. Rolling on ecstasy, partygoers became accustomed to drinking water instead of alcohol, with a renewed importance set on staying hydrated during their high. The place that had rapidly become one of the world's most famous clubs was now sinking. It would later be reported that the Hacienda ended up with debts of over £18 million. His success within the world of security had brought him an extra layer of respect in the Manchester community, which may have gone to his head as he agreed to be filmed for a documentary for the BBC's quirky Modern Times strand, and talked about having political ambitions and of Salford becoming an independent state. In July 1998, at the height of his power, Massey took the camera on a nighttime trawl of Manchester city centre. It ended in disaster. He was drawn into a row outside the Beaten Track Club and, incapable of backing down, stabbed a clubber from Leeds in the groin. The man almost bled to death. Massey fled to Amsterdam but was caught, extradited, convicted and jailed for 14 years, reduced to 10 on appeal. It was over. Massey was just shy of 40 when he landed his stiffest sentence, 14 years for wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm. His prime had been stolen from him. Chapter 3. The Road to Redemption. Massey returned from prison with a new perspective and thus a very different set of goals. His first act was to strip himself of the Mr. Big moniker that had become notorious. In his absence, new gangs had appeared. Massey would remain influential on his release, officially a security consultant to a firm named 21st Security, and of course, still an underworld statesman, but he was now in the back seat. He seemed to have mellowed. His house was modest with no overt security. He never left his roots or his friends and seems to have had no serious enemies. Incredibly, he decided to stand in 2012 as a candidate for Mayor of Salford. His election agent was later convicted of murdering his own parents and gained nearly 2,000 votes. Massey's people remained loyal to him. However, rumours about the legitimacy of his employer, 21st Security, were rife in the city, and it turned out, for good reason. An investigation conducted by a major British newspaper found that 21st Security, which was at the centre of a 5-year money laundering and fraud inquiry, had provided services to a school, an exclusive house builder, and a canal-side redevelopment. Construction businesses including Lang O'Rourke, Shepherd, and Balfour Beatty were among 49 companies holding contracts with 21st Security Limited, which was paid £12.6 million for legitimate work on building sites. Massey and his associates had been under investigation since 2011 through Operation Holly, which was run by Titan, the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit, a collaboration between 6 regional forces. The inquiry had 55 suspects, 6 of whom were arrested, including Massey. One of the suspects made extensive admissions about money laundering in a police interview. Officers believed that they had uncovered evidence related to fraudulent trading, fraud by false representation, false accounting, and cheating the revenue. Sensationally, there were accusations that one or more corrupt police officers were on the payroll. Among the issues of concern was a mysterious phone call to 21st Security 15 minutes before search warrants were executed in 2011, and claims that documents were secreted away as a result. Massey was a consultant to 21st Security, and police alleged that he was a shadow director. However, there is no suggestion that the blue-chip companies and other clients knew of any connection with organised crime. Detectives uncovered evidence that Massey was more heavily involved in 21st Security than its public listings suggested. They found that the company financed his mother's funeral in 2008, paying more than £10,000 towards a white gloss coffin, a hearse drawn by 4 horses, 2 horse outriders, and 12 limousines. Massey later told police he had repaid the money. His bank account showed little normal activity, suggesting that his lifestyle may have been supported by cash. 21st Security folded in 2011 after the arrest of Massey and 5 others, though no charges resulted from the investigation after prosecutors said there was no realistic prospect of conviction. When it came to the streets, Massey still took on the responsibility of keeping the peace, as he was swiftly thrown into mediating gang wars between the new dominant factions of Manchester that had risen during his absence. So, as he aged into his mid-50s, Massey stayed close to the game. He became less of a street operator and more of an advisor, which is the role he was serving in July 2015 on holiday in North Wales, when he found himself mediating an increasingly violent gang war. On one side, the A-Team, led by a Massey protégé, Stephen Britton. On the other side, the not-so-creatively named Anti-A-Team, whose members had abandoned Britain for a young scaffolder named Michael Carroll. By the time Massey was pulled in, things had reached a boiling point. On that fateful summer evening in 2015, Massey had just returned from Winkup's holiday camp on the Irish Sea in North Wales. The escape wasn't as relaxing as he had hoped. Massey had been visited by Stephen Britton to discuss the fallout bubbling away on the streets. The day he returned from holiday, Massey spent the afternoon with 2 gang associates, visited a bookie, bought the Bacardi and Cokes, drove the half-mile home, and pulled up to the wrought-iron gates outside his spacious red-brick colonial, set back from a busy road. Nearby, an assailant, alerted by the stranger who'd tailed Massey, lay in wait. At 7:27, as Massey stepped out of his car, a tall, athletic man wearing a fake beard and dressed in combat gear hurried across the road, pulled out an Uzi, and opened fire. In the driveway, Massey's left shin exploded. Bone fragments showered the gravel. He dropped the Bacardi, which shattered. A bullet struck 3 fingers in his right hand, tearing 1 digit clear off. Still, he was able to scramble behind some trash bins, take cover, and dial 999, shouting that he had been shot. The gunman strode up to the bins and continued firing. Of the 18 bullets that flashed out of his muzzle, perhaps the most crucial was the one that tore through Massey's 5th rib on his left side, passed through his chest cavity, struck his heart and lungs, and lodged in his back. As blood pooled in Massey's chest and on the ground, the shooter ran across the street, raced through the graveyard of the parish church of St. Anne, headed toward a wooded area, and hopped on a bicycle. A month later, Massey was entombed wearing the red of Manchester United, laid to rest in his beloved jersey. Even with this momentous loss, violence continued to reign in Manchester, with authorities offering a £50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Massey's killer. Unfortunately, the old code of Salford still ran deep. There were some traditions that could never be undone. On the side of the police, things were getting increasingly complex. Difficulties hit their peak upon the murder of John Kinsella in 2018. Kinsella, a long-time associate of Massey, had been the pallbearer at his friend's funeral. As the intensity rose, a joint trial was held for the murders of Paul Massey and John Kinsella. Inside, over the course of 6 weeks, the prosecution argued that Mark Fellows, aka the Iceman, had been paid to murder both men, all under the eye of the anti-A-team. If you'd like more detail about the Iceman, the build-up and act of both murders and the eventual dramatic court case, OCGTV have also produced a video on this. The link to this can be found in the description of this video. Until his death, Paul Massey had obeyed that code that had been instilled in him while still a youth. He may well have respected the decision of Fellows to never give up secrets. Another man who, although flawed, could never let go of the moral code that runs through the Salford streets. Massey's story was one of hard realities and harder choices. From his early days navigating the rough landscape of Salford, he carved out a path that would make him both a local legend and a marked man. His life was not without its faults. Paul would be the first to admit that, but beyond the criminal notoriety, he was a man who cared deeply for those around him. Paul's support for his friends, family, and the people of Salford was unwavering. He used his influence not just to gain power, but also to give back in ways many will never know. Beneath the hard exterior was a man with a heart. He was a loving father, a loyal friend, and a man who, despite his own struggles, often found a way to help those around him. Paul's generosity, his readiness to lend a hand, and his unshakable loyalty to those he considered family painted a picture of a man who was far more than the headlines and police records could ever capture. Today, we remember Paul Massey not just as a gangster, but as a man of contradictions, complexities, and courage. His story is a reminder that even the most hardened among us carry a history of pain, loyalty, and love. Paul's legacy will be remembered differently by those who knew him, but his impact on Salford and Manchester will never be forgotten.